Hello. So welcome here to Opero. Welcome everybody, welcome the people also who are online and listening to our conference, and welcome to our Aspen conference, which is called Information Integrity in AI Era. I'm very happy that we have done it together with Opero and with Aspen Digital, and it's a follow-up of the conference which we have had also the last year. We would like to show today kind of true European perspective on this topic, and this will be in two panels. The first panel will be about the information integrity, and the second one about the independent media and the regulation. What I would like to say, and welcome also, and I'm very thankful to all speakers, because we have a really diverse group and we can see then the different perspectives from people from the business, from Gen technology company, then from the academia, which is from the Oxford University, as well from the London School of the Economics, but also from the media, like is the Radio Free Europe and the New European, and also from the fact-based company Conspirator.sk. I'm very happy about that, because I think this give us, or can give us also a very good perspective. But who is important for us today is also the moderator. So let me welcome the person who is with Aspen for quite a long time. She is the executive director of the Aspen Digital. She is also the member of the board of The Guardian. She is in the advisory board of the TVN24. Quite experienced journalist and person who knows a lot about the media, but also the new technologies. So Vivian Schiller. Vivian, thank you very much for coming and for moderating the conference today. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan. Hi, everybody. I am absolutely thrilled to be back in Prague. This is one of my favorite cities, and I'm delighted to be working again with my wonderful colleagues at Aspen Central Europe. I probably shouldn't say this outside of Prague, but they are my favorite of the global Aspens to work with. Don't tell them, don't tell the others. Anyway, it's just really, really great to be here, and particularly to talk about, we have amazing panelists this afternoon, and to talk about a topic that, at least in the news media, is pretty much all anybody can talk about. So if you've been paying attention, which I'm sure you have, either because you're in the industry or you're interested or you're a student, really thrilled to have so many students here. You will know what happened on November 30th of last year. Who knows what happened? I'll ask the students what happened on November 30th of last year. Or I'll ask the professionals what happened on November 30th of last year. Anybody? That was the public launch of ChatGPT. And it was a date that I think will go down in history. Not because ChatGPT is the first time AI has been released in the wild. AI is part of all our lives and has been for many years. But it was the first time that regular people could really firsthand sort of interact and experience in a directed way what generative AI has made possible. And of course, there are many other models. There's DALL-E. There's a million of them now. And I think the sort of shock and awe that people that haven't been following the AI space for a long time was very real. And it also set off both a simultaneous gold rush and an arms race when it comes to artificial intelligence. Everybody, remember when blockchain and Web3 was a big thing? Everybody immediately forgot all about that, and they're all going into AI because that's where the money is. And so you get a lot of hype, and you get these sort of binary arguments between those that say AI is absolutely terrible because it's going to exacerbate all of the ills of the world right now, and those that say AI is terrible because the robot overlords are going to be controlling us in a few years. Or you have, and the only positive spin you hear is from the tech companies who are not exactly reliable narrators because they are pushing their products. And in the meantime, this is just a preview of everything we're going to talk about. And in the meantime, you've got these dueling regulations and bills, I mean, the EU is probably the farthest ahead of anyone. We'll hear more about that later. Different countries around the US, which is trying to get anything done, frankly, in the face of the fact that the government's about to be shut down. You have states of the United States doing their own regulation. It is a frenzy, and what is missing is sense-making, which is, there are great things about AI, there are bad things about AI, those two things can coexist, and AI just is. It's part of our lives and has been for a long time. So today, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to have a sober, not boring, but a sober conversation, maybe we'll be less sober over drinks later, about AI, and with a particular focus on information integrity. So we're going to have two panels. The first panel, we're going to level set about AI in the news media, and the second panel is going to be about regulatory efforts and other remedies. And we're going to try to keep this very interactive. So I'm actually going to start, before I even bring up the first panelists, with, oops, where's the iPad?
Over there.
Oh, sorry, it's charging. So we have just a couple of interactive polling questions. So, sorry, I told you we're keeping this casual. So if you guys apparently all know how to use Slido, which is great. So let's see. Okay, thank you. Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry, we're going to go to the first poll question for those who are. Okay, so the first question. Is everybody ready? It's hashtag integrity, if you want to find the poll. I'll just give everybody a minute. I'll do a little interpretive dance. The first question is, do you verify information published in the media you consume? So in other words, when you know, I'll just put it in my own words, which is, when you read something, do you look, well, actually, I'm not going to give away the second question. Do you seek to verify it, or do you just take it on faith? Yes or no? Are the answers supposed to pop up on the screen? I'm asking, oh yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, can I use this? Yeah, sorry. All right. Okay. Just give you another minute. Of course, this group is not representative of the general public, you realize. Because the answer is the majority, although not the vast majority, are saying they do verify information. 59% versus, oops, sorry, it's changing even as I'm watching. 64% versus 38%, 62, and anyway, you get the idea. Mid-60s and mid-30s verify information. I would strongly suspect if we took this out to the general population, it would be the reverse. In fact, it would probably even be more lopsided. The second question, can we pop up the second question? Because it follows on the first question. Okay. If your answer is yes, which was most of you, what technique do you use? There are 4 possible options here. Another information source, which the second is application for information verification. Not sure what that is. I guess that's probably like a fact-checking site, something like that. I use AI technology to help me with that, or other. Oh, send? Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Ah, there we go. Okay. We'll just give it another minute. You all can see, can you, sorry, I don't know Slido very well. Can you all see the responses too? Oh, okay. All right. So I don't need to read them out. So you see what's happening. Another news source. Okay. That's good. I'm curious what the others are. Anybody just want to shout out what that if it's other, what they use? I won't call on you since you're anonymous. Anybody? What do you use? Oh. Oh, ask a friend. Yeah. Anybody else who answered other have a? Okay. All right, great. We got another question later, but we're going to move on to the panel. Okay, with that, I'm very happy to bring the first panelists up to the stage, please. Yep, that's you.
Is there any seating?
No, just sit wherever you like. We're going to be very informal today, and we're going to be very interactive.
I was hoping to get this one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Do I?
Yeah. Two of you need to sit on the couch. It's okay. Yeah. Okay, so we have great panelists today. I'm going to introduce them. Starting all the way to my right is Michael Piechocek. Okay, I practiced that. I'm very proud. He is the director of AI at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering, Czech Technical University in Prague, here in Prague. He's the author of over 400 publications. He's been at the Czech Technical University for over 20 years, where he led the Department of Computer Sciences and co-founded the research-oriented program Open Informatics. Next to Michael is Tanit Koch. She's got somebody I've known for quite a long time, mostly hanging out in conferences, I think exclusively hanging out in conferences. Tanit has a long track record in both journalism and political campaign. She was some of her many, many, many roles. She was editor of RTL, of the news channel NTV. She was editor-in-chief of Germany's best-selling newspaper, Bild, a podcast host. She's, like I said, worked on political campaigns. She currently writes the column Germansplaining for the British weekly, The New European. Next, Charlie Beckett, also someone I've known via conferences for a long time, is the director of Polis, a think tank for research and debate around international journalism society, which he founded at the London School of Economics. And quite relevant to this conversation, he founded and leads the Journalism AI project. I will note that he founded it before November 30th of last year, well before, and was previously a news executive at Channel 4, BBC News, and elsewhere. And Peter Jančarek, okay, anti-disinformation officer at Seznam CZ, did I pronounce that right? Where he works to improve the quality of the news feed and identify information on Seznam services. He also co-founded Conspiratori SK, which seeks to protect brands from displaying their sites on fake news sites. Good luck with that. It seems to be ads, yeah. What did I say? They're ads. Oh, sorry. Display their ads, yeah, which is an ongoing problem, so somebody's got to fix that eventually. He's also created Checkbot, not Chat, yeah, Checkbot, the world's first Facebook chatbot that helps spot disinformation and train for media literacy. So welcome. This is just a fantastic group. Okay, so before we go dark, because we will inevitably go dark, we're gonna start with the light, and I want to just sort of do a little bit of a landscape of how, with the panel, about how news organizations are using AI right now, because there is in every newsroom, in every part of the world, at every journalism conference, at every part of the world, this is what people are talking about and trying to figure out. So, Charlie, I'm going to begin with you, because this specific issue is literally what you do for a living.
That's right. And the first answer is that every single journalist just about in the modern world is using AI and has been doing for some years now. Every time you do a Google search, there's a kind of AI. AI is a very broad, you can explain this better, very broad umbrella term for a whole series of technologies like machine learning, natural language processing, and so on. But that's been around for some time. My project has been running for 5 years. 5 years ago, we did a big survey that sought to see what people were doing with it. And it was mainly quite large scale, quite simple tasks, like collating statistics, for example, going through big documents, or sometimes creating quite simple content, like weather reports or statistics or so on, football scores, company results. And it was also doing quite a lot of work with audiences. It was using audience data to automate things like revenue, paywalls, and so on as well. But most of the time, if you were a journalist in a newsroom, you didn't see it. It was invisible. Somebody else, generally speaking, was running that technology. And then, as Vivian says, a year ago it completely changed with generative AI. And in terms of the user experience, it is, as you say, a very sort of inverted commas democratic. Anybody can use it. Hands up if you've ever used ChatGPT. Hands up if you haven't. Why not? I mean, the point is that anybody can do it for 5 minutes, and obviously you can do it in all sorts of different ways, and there's a million other tools, some of which aren't really anything to do with generative AI. And they're very, very exciting. We've just done another version of our survey. We looked at, I think, over 100 different news organizations spread around the world. We're very global. And it was a very interesting picture. It was kind of like panic plus overexcitement for most people. You know, people, often the same person would think, oh my God, here we go again. We've had the internet, we've had social media. Now, once again, my world's going to be disrupted, and I'm really frightened that it's going to take our jobs or it's going to take our business. Other people were going, oh, thank God, at last, here's something that can create incredible efficiencies, great savings. This could, help us survive, and it could help us to, reach audiences. And I'll give you a couple of little examples that I just came across in the last couple of days, actually. One was, it's not the first time, but somebody's created a tool for podcasts, and it will automatically translate any podcast into just about any, not any language, but into lots of different languages, possibly even Czech. And the clever thing it does is it doesn't do it as a text, it does it in your voice. So you record something in Czech, and it will do the same podcast in your voice in Japanese, for example. The other, so that's a kind of delivery thing that is incredibly exciting. Suddenly, the world is your marketplace. And suddenly you don't have to be able to speak languages like English or German to be able to understand English or German journalism. So that's rather lovely. Another wonderful tool I saw recently, which really blew people's minds, it's quite practical, and this will make sense if you've worked in a newsroom. AP have got a beta model of AI-powered archive search. Now, if you've ever been on a magazine or a TV station and you try to find an image, you want that image. Now, at the moment, you have to put in, I want Vladimir Putin from 2013, February the 15th, when somehow he was wearing sunglasses and looking unhappy. And of course, you don't. You'll never find that. But with intelligence research, you can literally say, I want to have Vladimir Putin wearing sunglasses, looking unhappy. And it will find it.
Many, I think.
Even if it's within a video, it will find that frame and give it to you, generally speaking. This is extraordinary. But it's all very practical. If you notice, most of this stuff is quite practical. It's supportive, generally, of journalism. Because journalism is a bit different to other industries. We've got this problem around accuracy. We like to be accurate, generally speaking. And also, if you're going to show an image of something, people pay you for the real image. They don't pay you to make up an image. So in that sense, there are kind of limitations on what you can do. We'll come to other limitations. But basically, people have, in our survey, which is good, it's not a representative survey, it's a selection. But generally speaking, it was something like 85% thought that they would be doing far more with generative AI in the next year. At the moment, they're experimenting. But even the ones that are saying, whoa, careful, which is the good policy, even those, they've got people within their organization either overtly or covertly experimenting. And some of the tools have been amazing. Just one last example, a guy who was doing coding in a newsroom, and I said, do your bosses know? And he said, no, I haven't told them. And I said, how much more effective, what's the efficiency gain? He said, oh, about 80%. So I think that his bosses would quite like to know about that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll come back to you. Michael, I want to go to you now that we've sort of gotten a little taste of some of the tools and some of the ways that newsrooms are using AI. Let's just take a quick step back for a minute and talk about, as Charlie said, generative AI has been around for a long time, AI, I want you to explain to us in simple terms for the audience, what is AI? And specifically, what is generative AI, and how does that differentiate from non-generative AI?
Okay, so I can do a quick lecture, right? So do we have a whiteboard here?
Yeah.
No, I'm just joking. For a long time, AI was only a piece of research, a research discipline. Only recently, in the last 30 years, it turned into technology. And the purpose of the scientific discipline and currently the technology is to be able to replicate human cognitive capabilities in a computer, okay? And the truth is that we are way beyond replicating, because it's very difficult to replicate to the exact capability of a person. So we are overcoming, right? So AI is overcoming human kind of capabilities in different areas. And what's important is that those cognitive capabilities have been always understanding, sensing, seeing, hearing, right? Second was reasoning, to be able to process data, to draw conclusions. And the last one was making decisions, okay? Drawing conclusions that are actionable. The truth is that recently, in the last couple of years, people were passionate about language as a next exhibit of human intelligence. And for long, people thought that, people have a patent for language, that language to language, that's something that people do and nobody else can do. And there have been attempts to automate and develop language in computer for many decades. And only recently it went to perfection that we are no longer able to distinguish who is who wrote this text, who speaks, whether it's a machine, it's an algorithm, or whether it's a human being. And through this, the concept of a Turing test, which was for a long time a de facto test of being able to develop AI, has been overcome. So because AI made its progress to language, hence the generative piece of AI, because until recently AI was analytical. And the main job of AI was to analyze data, images, videos, time series, financial markets, weather, and to draw conclusions, predict something, classify, cluster, detect anomalies. That's no longer the case only. These days, AI is also chipping into the capability to not only analyze, but generate. Generating text, generating voice, generating images, generating movies, generating subtitles, generating architecture. So that's a new thing. And what's interesting here is that people for long thought that AI will automate intellectual, but repetitive, mundane, and boring work. Okay? Now we are in a space where AI is competing with people in creativity. Isn't it exciting? Partly frightening? The truth is, I really believe that the true creativity, which is challenging status quo, coming up with new concepts, new ideas, new businesses, new concepts, this is where people will continue to excel over machines for long. Only the concept and the expectation of creativity is going to change.
Yeah, great.
Make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Tanit, talk a little bit about, and again, reminder that we're still talking about the positive use cases. But you were a big proponent of sort of not being fearful of technology and embracing technology for all its innovation potential. So what are you seeing in terms of, because you're constantly in touch with news organizations all over the world, working with organizations, how are you seeing AI for innovation?
Well, you're familiar with the term history is repeating itself, yeah. Because the industry has been through disruptive periods. Actually, it is in one right now, and I'm not sure it was ever not in one.
I don't think so.
I was told this used to be a company where printing presses so a print shop basically. So where you sit now, you probably had printing presses. It was even hotter than it is at the moment. And so for particularly newspapers, there were people who were sort of taking, I don't know the technical terms for that in English, but taking the letters and sticking them into frames and then turning them around and literally printing. And journalists would have to wait for hours and hours, and loads of them sort of took to alcohol because they were just waiting for so long for getting a final proof page, which they would then, that's what it's called, send to bed. So the rapidity, we used to have to wait in front of phone booths in order to make that call to the editor back at home to talk to them about sort of world relevant events that nobody could hear about, because that was way before you were born, and that was way before there was something like YouTube or live coverage, etc. Wiring pictures, imagine a World Cup in 1954 to South America from where it took place, was incredibly difficult and lengthy, and you sometimes had to bribe people who were sticking sort of phone cables together to be on the first call, the first overseas call. So technology has actually always helped advance journalism because it helped make it faster. And I know people often criticize that journalism is too speedy, but I think there is nothing wrong with getting information and getting news very fast as long as they're correct. But it also helped us verify things. So there is a lot in technology right now. If you look at even social media, of course you can criticize what was formerly called Twitter, but I remember that once people realized that sort of quoting somebody out of context would then lead to that person being able to post a tweet saying, basically that's not what I said, and I have an audio file to prove it. If you look back 30 years ago and some quote was taken out of context and somebody was misquoted, it was very hard to set that right and then to call the reporter and call his, I don't know, the head of the news desk or the politics desk and call the editor, and they would say, yeah, well, maybe we corrected, maybe not. And now you have, as a person dealing with media, you have an incredible power in sort of checking what the media are doing. So actually this makes the industry, if we're clever about it, more savvy about what we do and more careful and more precise in our work. So I would always sort of discourage against being fearful of technology, but what we've seen in the last 15 years, social media coming up. Journalists are also humans, so obviously humans are not, I'm not sure whether the scientists among us know more about that than I do, but my feeling is that humans, since basically we evolved, we're not embracing change, because since the times when we were living in caves, you would never know, is the next cave any better we have to move to? Is it going to be, I don't know, warmer, sunnier, bigger, or maybe will there be moldy? So change inherently for like us as a species is something weird, maybe threatening, and it takes a rational sort of a rational choice to make to then say, it is there. We have to live with it. It won't go away. So we'd rather embrace it because, and I'm sure we're going to come to the bad actors too. The other ones are going to do it too. So it's actually our job in a time when we see that bad actors use technology to disinform the public, to do our best to use technology to make us more efficient, to maybe even save funds on one side to then have more room for better reporting, better coverage of things. So yes, generally try to embrace it. It's easy if we talk to a very young audience. Obviously you're natives, you're growing up with this, but I'm sure that in 20, 25 years time, or maybe even 5 years time, you'll also encounter something that wasn't there when you learned how to use a smartphone. So it's always something new. Actually, at the moment, I think I'm with Charlie, I'm with you. There is a hype around it. It's a big sales pitch. And we used to have a hype around social media, a hype around, I don't know, oh God, do I have to be on Snapchat now? Oh, yet another tool, and another tool, and another tool. But it's worthwhile. And from what I feel is that news organizations that are clever, what they do is basically allow their whole organization, the newsroom, everyone in product, in business, and in editorial to discover. So bottom line, AI will always be a leadership question as well. How does leadership in news organizations allow for people working there to discover new tools, to learn from them, to work with them, to adapt, and that, in the end, yes, is a leadership question.
Yeah, and I will say it's actually, we will look back at this time when, you know, as the beginning of newsrooms, learning how to use AI tools and sort of just flailing a little bit, finding some successes. We're living in a historical moment, I think. Of course, every moment seems to be, like you said, a historical moment. So Peter, you're a builder and an innovator. So talk to us. Okay, I'm gonna bestow that on you, whether you want to claim it or not. So talk about some of the innovative tools you see made possible through your work with AI for information.
Well, okay, today I'll be trying to do my best in switching my heads between conspiratory and
No,
Seznam.
I understand,
I will speak on behalf of Seznam now.
Yes.
By the way, how many non-Czech people do we have here in the audience? All the non-Czechs, raise your hand. Okay,
wow.
Good. So I guess it's good to explain, first of all, what is Seznam. Seznam started in 1996, and it started with web search. We actually did web search before Google, and we are quite a unique being in the media space because Czechia, as one of the few countries in the world, has a very strong national player, which is now fast forward to today. We are basically a mixture of a tech/media company. We have our TV, we have our media outlets, but we also aggregate news. So we have this kind of sometimes difficult, sometimes very entertaining position. And what's also important to say, around 8.5 million people use our services every month, which in a country of 10 million people is quite a lot. Therefore, we feel a great deal of responsibility. What kind of news, what kind of content do we push forward? And you wanted to start with the positive sides of AI, and we see a lot of them.
You'll get your chance for to descent into darkness.
I will get more depressing when I get to the Slovak elections.
Exactly. Okay.
And we were actually embracing artificial intelligence. A lot of our news teams, especially at Seznam Správy, use it. We were actually one of the first, or I think we were the first media outlet that adopted AI code. So we are very transparent about the use of AI. Our journalists have to disclose the use of language models and so on. And we also, in our radio, we have AI voice. We have an AI moderator who was basically made, he's called Hachiko, based on Barahachi, and he's taking it is taking night shifts. So before midnight and 1 a.m., AI is moderating in our radio, Express FM. Also, we are doing our best when I turn to the aggregator side of our service, because our newsfeed is the most visited website. This is the homepage of Seznam. This is still the most visited website in Czechia, in total. So we obviously have our recommender system, and we want to make sure that we provide reliable content that is relevant. So for example, one of the first AI tools that we adopted, it was last year actually. I think it was before November even. We have an AI detector of clickbaits. So we have a very clever algorithm that is trained through machine learning that can identify a clickbait in a Czech title. So and our recommender system then tries to push the clickbait down. So it's not on the prominent spot, because we don't want to have our homepage littered with clickbaits. What we are launching these days, we also have a discussion platform. So our editors use AI. You know, the language models are very well equipped to dismantle manipulative comments, for example. So it helps them a lot. We would like to have new tools so they also are able to match fact checks with manipulative content in our discussion boards. And what we are really proud of, that we are currently, some of our editors are already using it, but we have an in-house developed On our own language model, on our own content, we developed an AI detection tool. So we are able to detect what was generated by AI and what was written by a person. We work very well in Czech. By the way, I also tried it in Slovak, and it works quite well too. So I believe Polish would do quite well as well. And the reason, again, is very simple. We want to prevent that our services, our newsfeed, our self-publishing platforms and other services turn into a junkyard of generated articles. So at the same time, we are trying, I think we see two positive sides of AI. One is really helping our journalists, and we do it in a very transparent fashion. And at the same time, with our editors and with our aggregator tools, we see that it's really helping us to keep the info space clean and healthy and so on. Yeah. I hope it was positive enough.
It was positive, and now we're going to let you all loose in all of the problematic aspects of AI. It's the limitations, the risks. You already mentioned one, Peter, which is, I mean, this isn't news organizations creating it, but it impacts the information ecosystem, which is stories that have been fully generated by AI. So I'll just stick with you for a minute and say, how does that, who's doing that, and what's the problem with that?
You mean what's the problem with the generating articles?
I'm just, it's what we call a softball question, yeah.
Well, journalism to me is about finding a story, sitting on your ass for quite some time, calling your sources and trying to find the best and most accurate story in that. Whereas if you try to outsource that to a language model, that is sometimes hallucinating, that is sometimes wrong, that is making up sources, then it gets tricky. And with us, because there is also a business model behind our service. So if we have a Cessna Medium, which is a self-publishing platform, and if you write good enough, we will split the ad revenue with you. If you are a successful author, we want to give you a bit of our advertising revenue. And if you are making money off generated content, that's also a business/legal issue. So.
But in fact, just sticking with using AI to write, we're now again moving into this other territory. There is still value in using AI to do composition. Many reporters that I know are using AI to do, say, well, there's a. Am I allowed to swear on this because it's an expression? A shitty first draft of a story. That's actually an industry term, at least in America. I mean, there is value to doing that. Of course, it needs to be fact-checked. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you mentioned I write a column. I'm not a native English speaker, so I do write it in English because I started the column before DeepL, etc. Existed, and I sort of like working my brain around foreign language. But I now use ChatGPT to just check it and basically once I have my not that shitty first draft, I hope, but the first draft ready, I'll just upload it and say, could you improve it? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it actually, from my point of view, it doesn't get any better. But I'm currently thinking about sort of uploading I don't know how many columns I've so far written, and just try and tell it, listen, why don't you think of a topic and then write a column in that style? And I'm pretty sure it'll turn out much better than I expect, which I probably shouldn't tell the editor because he might then want to decrease my monthly salary or wages. But I also would just like to add, before we get to all the negative stuff, Charlie earlier mentioned the wonders Gen AI can do in archives, and you coming from broadcasting, of course, thought of visuals. I remember when I was a trainee working at the time for a paper, sort of spending a lot of times going through archives to figure out this politician or that politician, they now said something, they were quoted on record, giving a statement vehemently on some topic, and I tried to figure out what they said about that same topic 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 20 years ago. And if you're lucky, they set it on record in print because then you would find it in the archive. If you were unlucky, they said something completely different on the same topic, like totally changed their mind 20 years earlier, 10 years earlier on television. And there was basically, unless you were really, really lucky, no way of finding that, because anything said on radio broadcast or TV broadcast wasn't automatically described. So it was basically just add and then left. So being a politician, the best thing for you was basically to be on live TV and say whatever, and then hope people maybe hear it, but nobody writes it down, because then it's out there, but it's basically forgotten. And if we look at sort of one of the core jobs journalism has, it's holding the powerful to account. And I'm very positive and absolutely convinced that GenAI in that sense, or AI, the archive function, the transcription function of it, which is so much easier and so much cheaper than it used to be and faster, will help us in that in that achievement, holding the powerful to account.
I just wanted to add to this and to respond to the capability of detecting AI. So I really respect everybody who's making progress in this matter, but as a scientist, I need to say that this is a very hard problem. In a way, you can build a detector that can detect AI in text, but to be able to build a system that deceives the detector, it's very easy. So it's very difficult to build a robust detector of AI, and we, with our users, are learning that users do not necessarily want to understand or need to understand whether the text have been written in part by AI, to which part. Users are more interested to learn whether they can trust it. The trust is getting more important concept comparing to kind of the technological support that led to the origination of the text. And I'm speaking as a CTO of Gen. I saw a couple of hands of people who are not from the Czech Republic who doesn't know what is Gen. Okay, few people don't. Aspen Digital is a consumer cybersecurity firm that was created a year ago as a merger of the biggest European Avast software and the biggest American NortonLifeLock, formerly Symantec, to create this big consumer cybersecurity company. And one of our goals is to really protect the users online so that they can enjoy safe digital lives. And one component of digital safety is not to be manipulated and misinformed. It's getting these days more important rather than whether our systems are getting hacked by attackers, because attackers no longer attack systems. Attackers attack the human mind. And news is a mechanism how a human mind can be hacked. And we really want to work with media and as a tech company to be there for media and to help to protect people's mind while they live online, protect people's mind while they read news. And the experience that I have is leading me to highlighting two critical problems. You know, there are many problems, but I see two most important problems. One is how tech companies can help media to create trust. How, what metadata we can help journalists to create, to maintain, to work with, so that they make people to trust the content matter. Is it, do I encrypt some information into an image from a camera so that in the image there's encrypted data that tells me when the image has been taken and how the image has been manipulated? Is this a trust aspect? Or is it building trusted media houses? Somebody trusts Washington Post, somebody trusts New York Post, right? So there are kind of different perspective who you trust, who you don't trust. So kind of the technological support and kind of be there for media to help them to build all the backends needed so that people can trust better to the news source. I think this is one key problem that combination of media and technology needs to work on. And the second one, and Petr already spoke about this with great level of detail, is recommendation. Okay, recommendation algorithms have been here for last 20 years. This is not a new kids on the block. We consume content that is recommended to us by algorithms for a long time. And in order to be able to exhibit freedom online, to kind of be sure that when I'm online, I'm making my own choices. I'm consuming a movie that I want to see, I'm reading the news that I want to read, I'm befriending a person I want to befriend online, I want to have certainty that I'm making my decision. It's not the algorithms that are kind of recommending, and the recommendation is somebody else making a decision on my behalf. So to be able to feel freedom in this matrix, what's important is that people get more transparency, more explainability, and more control of the recommending systems. And the recommending systems are at the back end maintained by software companies, media houses, search engines. And at this point in time, there is kind of nobody taking consumers' part, kind of building tech for people so that they can understand better why am I reading this content and how can I read more of that content. And maybe I don't want SESNAM to decide on my behalf that I shouldn't see clickbaits. I want to make this my decision, and maybe I like clickbait, right? Or maybe I want to see more sport. I want to see less finance. And I want to have this recommendation under my control. And this is what technology in either side, at the side of people who recommend, like Peter, at the side of people who protect people like myself, this doesn't exist. And this is a big challenge, and we should build this in collaboration.
I want to give you a chance to chime in, Peter. Then I want to come back a little bit to news organizations, what they can do.
I wanted to say that it's only one of the inputs. I mean, you can choose to have more clickbaits if you wish, so that's not really a problem.
You can have your clickbait. It's okay. Don't worry.
But I'm really glad to the professor that he mentioned one important thing, because I think that after November 30th, the whole public discourse was on AI was hijacked by generative AI only, and we completely forgot about the AI that we had here for many, well, at least 15 years or 20 years when Facebook introduced Newsfeed, when they started not to show you posts chronologically, but started to really aggregate the posts and trying to weigh them and so on. And I often get a question that how AI is meddling with elections in Slovakia. And when it comes to generative AI, because we really have to split it, when it comes to generative AI, close to none. I mean, we've seen some deep fakes a couple of days ago, but it's not something that is really doing a major difference with the voters. What is, although, on the other hand, is the non-generative AI that is making us problems. Because when you look at the top 10 or top 20 most influential people on Slovak Facebook, these are mostly far-right politicians or disinformation actors. And in the very bottom, you will find probably the president, and that's it. And we can see that the recommender system, for example, of Facebook, which is a major social network in Slovakia, also here, is really pushing forward and spreading and amplifying this kind of content. That's why we can say that AI, to some extent, is meddling with elections, because it's only showing this type of content.
Charlie,
we're going dark already.
Yeah, we're going very dark. There's so much to cover here. Charlie, I want to, if you could just pass the mic, turn back to you. So we've talked, we were talking about news organizations. Now we're talking about sort of a much broader societal issue and the information ecosystem from bad actors. We're going to explore that a little bit more, but before we do, I want to just come back to the role of news organizations and come back to, you started with us with all kinds of interesting, promising, positive use cases. What do you see as the risks or limitations of AI for news organizations?
Yeah, well, I think some of the kind of, we should always bear in mind, we did a big report back in 2018 looking at the platforms and how could you counter some of the downsides. And one of the lessons was, don't confuse media effects with real world effects. So if you've got bad politics somewhere, that's possibly because you've got bad politicians or a bad economy or something, So just that caveat, which I think is important. And then when you look at problems around technology, I think there are kind of three levels from a newsroom perspective. One is just the problems that you have with AI that everyone's going to have with AI. And it's probably going to be a lot worse in other sectors. So, for example, using AI in recruitment can lead to real biases against people, we discovered. Using facial recognition for policing, again, the biases inherent in some of these data sets and algorithms can lead to really bad outcomes. So there's those kind of generic problems, which means that if you're using it, be careful. You know, it may not be sound as a journalist. And in fact, there's a role there for journalism to do a watchdog role. So whatever beat you are doing as a journalist, AI is going to be important in it, so you need to know about it so you can do your reporting well. Then there's this sort of level of AI risks, which I think are kind of general to the industry. And that would be things, even political things. And the funny thing is, by the way, if you could do a search on, I'm trying to remember which one it is, ChatGPT, it actually tells you all these, by the way. It comes up with a systems card which says, be careful, this technology is inaccurate. This technology might lead to technological dependency. So they tell you that. So if we come to rely on these too much, who controls this technology? Is it us as news people? Is it, you know, computer scientists in your country? No, it's not. It's a bunch of people, generally speaking, in California. You know, a few companies. So there's those kind of general risks that you have as an industry. And bear in mind, the news industry is tiny. Some of it is beautifully run, like yours, but even then, it's tiny. Even in America, it's a relatively tiny part of the internet or a part of social media, and the numbers are tiny compared to the amount of money you can make in virtually anything else. So therefore, we're not a priority unless we shout very hard. And that's why I thought it was so great you're doing your own language modeling, because, you know, a bit of DIY on this is good. And then there's this very specific problems, I think, for journalism, which are things like it's not accurate, it makes things up, you know. Now, I think there is sort of good news on all those fronts. The bit that's the specific problems for journalism, well, yes, it's biased. Yes, it makes mistakes. I don't know if you noticed, but journalists do that a lot as well. Journalists are very biased. They make mistakes. And they're often very simplistic, and they're struggling for resources. So fun enough, we work with quite a few people who have been trying to use AI tools to address that. You know, using tools that try and monitor journalistic bias in a newsroom. We've got one team, talking of your watchdog role, Tarnet, we've got one team doing a really ambitious piece of work where they are trying to create a live monitoring tool which will track, in this case, British MPs' financial relationships, where they get funding from, you know, if they get donations, all legal, but they get these donations and they have to declare it. And then they're going to try and correlate that to things like how they vote or when they talk about these things in Parliament or anywhere else. It's much harder to do than you think. You know, if you sat down as a journalist on your arse, as you put it, you could be sitting there for 6 months doing a graph that somehow tried to put all this together. They're trying to create a model that can do that instantly. So that's kind of, well, I'm back to positive, sorry. I'm back to positive. There's hopeless bias of mine. You know, but my optimism in that sense is that if we work very hard, we can address so many of these, because journalism, in a way, the history of journalism, and you know this, Vivian, you know this, Tarnet, the history of journalism has been to work very quickly, to try and tell a story, and to realize that mainly our work is provisional and imperfect, and constantly trying to improve on that. You know, so this produces bigger problems for us, faster problems, and some of it is without our control, and that is spooky. That is kind of yet more. That's a trend that's been continuing for the last 20, 30 years, that we have lost control over information. Some people would say that's a jolly good thing. You know, I mean, I think you made the point, you know, it's quite good. Oh, sorry, Tarnet made the point. Isn't it great that journalists can be held accountable by our readers? You know, that's terrific.
I would like to pick up on a couple of things just said to going dark, and you mentioned the trust issue. I think one problem we see at the moment is that it is so easy for Jen and I to create news sites, websites that look absolutely legit, that look like a trusted source, and basically just spam like the search algorithms and the others with it. We were at a news conference just this weekend where exiled Russian journalists complained that in search engines, although the Russian state media had sort of been filtered out, which is fairly easy to do, what now popped up were sort of independent fake websites spreading propaganda, and I'm pretty sure algorithms can be trained to detect those as well, but then the others train their algorithms just to, so it's basically exactly an arms race in that. And then if you have people who are not, and I'm quite positive that the younger generation is more savvy in the sense that I remember being told don't trust everything that is in the newspaper. And I'm pretty sure that, but we might come to that later, that you all do know that there is something like fakes out there, and not to trust everything that you see in your feed, and maybe to check. And you have peers who then say, oh no, that's fake, let's debunk it. So you grow up into society which already is used to that. Because you mentioned election, and because elections, and Charlie mentioned the human factor, I sadly don't know enough about Slovakia at all, or your wonderful country, apart from the fact that it's Prague and it's just so beautiful. But if we look back at 2016, which was like the one, I don't know, big social media happening in the US, I remember the hype about Cambridge Analytica and what Facebook and Russian propaganda on Facebook and fake news had done. But I always wondered whether it wasn't just sort of Hillary Clinton not going to Wisconsin and actually talking to the people there, than Vladimir Putin being all over Facebook and spreading false information. So the human factor, both in politicians and in journalists, is something I think, have a tendency to neglect, because especially journalists have a sense of entitlement and a sense of self-importance, because the job at hand is very important, don't get me wrong. I think journalism is vital for any democratic society. It's just that the people doing it, and you made that remark, are fallible. We are humans. And you mentioned I had a stint in campaign communications for 4 months during the last general election in Germany in 2021. And I knew before, I'm not naive, I knew before that journalists do get it wrong, and that there is bias out there, etc. But I was quite surprised, to put it in neutral, how much disinformation was out there involuntarily spread and produced by humans, by journalists, who would get something wrong, feeding into their own confirmation bias. Oh, this candidate, yeah, it just totally fits the mold. He must have said that. I don't like him anyway. So whatever, and tweeted something which would then get, I don't know, tens of thousands of retweets, and we'd spend hours to try and make them delete the tweet. And we're talking about public broadcasters. We're talking about very independent, very reputable news organizations. So to think that AI is the problem is basically pushing aside that there's always been the problem of lazy journalism, of sloppy journalism, of biases in journalism. And much as I think it's important, we need to talk about anything involving tech and Gen AI, we also always need to look at what we do and what we can improve in our own jobs.
Yeah. It's certainly true, I will have to say, from personal experience. There is nothing more eye-opening than being the subject of reporting. When you're a journalist, you're like, wow, really good journalists just get so much wrong. But I'm going to come to you just in 1 second, Michael, and maybe you're going to make this point. But I do want to just push back, because we need a little conflict on this panel. You all are too agreeable. A little bit, yes, of course humans are fallible, but what we know about targeting is pretty persuasive. And isn't it true that AI will allow that kind of targeting at the scale and speed, Charlie's shaking his head, that we haven't seen before? In other words, very targeted messaging to individuals who may or may not be more susceptible to mis or disinformation.
So I'll hand over to Charlie in a second, because he obviously knows more, and you obviously know more about it than I do. But sort of my personal belief in the human race, in mankind, is that we're not as, like, there are incredibly stupid individuals out there, obviously, But the notion that people can be so easily manipulated, I think, is neglecting the fact that people have a stance. They have a belief in things before media actually get to them. That is the confirmation bias, and it's called confirmation bias and not influential bias or whatever else, because it confirms something you already believe. And I'm not saying this makes it any better, but it's just the difference. People, I know people sort of liked and enjoyed Bild, while a lot of people critical of that large German tabloid said that, oh, you're manipulating the audience, you're manipulating your readers, and you make them believe that this is that way or the other way. Whereas I always thought, well, there's a reason they trust those news or any other news. They would rather buy a left of center paper or a right of center paper because they hold those beliefs and maybe they want to be confirmed in all of that. And I think that we underestimate that generally the web and algorithms have helped us get a much, much bigger news spread and many more sources than we ever had. So when I grew up, I had 3 TV channels, and I was lucky because my mum subscribed to 2 newspapers, which was a lot more than many other households. So that was massive. I mean, just imagine 2 newspapers and 3 TV channels. You're lucky to grow up in an environment where you can pick and choose your sources from all over the world and make up your mind.
I'll just let Charlie respond on that other, because he, okay, and then I'll come to you right after that.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what Tanit said. I mean, long term, we know that there are all sorts of things that frame people's opinions. Family, schooling, normally your parents. Your parents is your best predictor of how you're going to vote, for example. And of course, there are moments when elections can be very tight, or a particularly polarized society when media or information does have a role. The Brexit vote, for example, was incredibly narrow, so it's arguable that may have had some kind of impact. But again, generally speaking, the evidence is that even with the vast volumes of propaganda and so on, it doesn't have much impact, partly because of what Tanit said about people think that way anyway. They're much more influenced by economic conditions, by their peer groups, by their own experience of life in general, than they are by a media message. I went into journalism because I wanted to change the world. I really thought that my articles were going to change your mind. No, not really. They didn't much. I still want to do it, and I still think it's a vital role that over time we're able to have this discussion and debate.
They still are going to change the world.
Charlie. Yeah, they might well change the world. Other things will change the world. Things will change the world if you invent, new technology, for example. So I just think, for example, I don't know what's going to happen. It's really scary when you see the ability to create yet more disinformation. But there's already a load out there. Now, I don't know what's happening in Slovakia or Poland. I know a bit about it. But I do know that it is actually rather difficult to influence particular elections. It's much worse that, it's what's happening in Poland is much worse when you're closing down independent media. It's much more worrisome, I think, than what Putin's bots might do.
Michael, I'm sorry, you've been patiently waiting.
I just want to share, as a professor with students, some heuristics, right? So when people ask you, where is the AI danger, my advice is always to think, where is the biggest AI opportunity? Because the AI danger is the same place as the biggest AI opportunity. It's interesting. Like, one exciting piece is that we don't really know where AI is going to be in 18 months from now. We just don't know how capable the modelers are going to be. We don't know how great the algorithms are going to be. It's exciting. It's a great opportunity. But that's a massive, massive danger. Do you know what is a Moore's law? Who does know what Moore's law is? Okay, Moore's law is a law that tells you that the capacity of chip doubles every 18 months, okay? And this law has been valid for the last 70 years. And that was a law kind of law of physics that led venture capitalists to invest and to predict the evolution of technology. We don't have this now. We just cannot predict. We don't know where AI is going to be. In cybersecurity, attackers are using AI every single day. It's crazy. But the truth is, the cybersecurity professionals are using AI every single day, and they are defeating the cyber attackers. It's the same spot. In education, okay? So people say, so why don't we use AI for education? Wouldn't it be great if we can personalize education to every kid so that one kid is smart and this one is slow and this one likes this and this one like that, and we can build a personalized curricula for each of the kids? Wouldn't that be great? No, it would be disaster. Do we want the algorithm at the age of 4 to predispose a kid and make sure that this kid would never become a dentist because the algorithm decided at the age of 4, you just don't want this? But, okay, so we can ban it in the EU and say, okay, so no personalization in education because it's against our values. But does it mean that Chinese will also ban it? Maybe not. Maybe in 30 years there'll be job market. We'll be competing kind of European educated and Chinese educated. So do we want to be taken over by the future Chinese? We don't want this. So the world is complicated, and the opportunity is very near to the danger. And I would paraphrase to kind of come back to the media piece, that one of the biggest values that AI created to users of the internet in the last 20 years has been personalization. And personalization is the single biggest threat of people online. So we really need to think about personalization, because like who knows what is Inflection AI? Does anybody know Inflection AI? Great startup funded by Mustafa Suleyman, founder of DeepMind, and Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn. And they are building personalized chatbots, personalized ChatGPTs. So do we want each of us to have our own chatbot, telling each of us something else? Currently, there is ground truth. Everybody can make an experiment on ChatGPT, right? And investigate whether they hallucinate or not, on what data they work right, on what data they don't work right. As soon as we start personalizing chatbots, we get completely disconnected. So if we are disconnected online, we don't understand each other online because we all have different ground truth, which is a problem with objective media. If you start using our personalized chatbots, which is where the world is going, I see like a danger 2.0.
Can I just come in? Because I think that's a really good example of your principle, which I love actually. You know, the greatest danger is next to the greatest opportunity. Because around personalization, obviously, if you really could do what Cambridge Analytica said, which is not true, they lied, but if you could give the perfect advert for the perfect, individualized advert for the individual customer at the right time, at the moment they're a million miles from that. You all know your experience of advertising is dreadful. And sometimes quite embarrassing and contradictory. But one of the biggest problems for journalism at the moment is the opposite of personalization. It's optimization. At the moment, it's so crude, people's experience of journalism online. As Tarnit mentioned, I think, that when you go online for news, you actually get more sources than ever before. And you get a vastly greater volume. Never mind whether there's any fake stuff in there, just the good stuff, right? Just the good stuff. And you want it because you care about news, you're intelligent, you're community-minded. Perhaps you need some news because you're trying to work out your career or your education or your tax. So you want news. Most people do. More people want news than ever before, and there's more news out there. But it's going to the wrong places, and it's making people really unhappy. It's making people confused. They say, I don't want a 1,000-word article. I want a really short article on this. I don't want to have 6 stories all about the same thing. I want these 3 different things, no more. And don't keep giving me more and more stuff because that's just making me depressed. And it's making me confused and feeling overwhelmed. And that is a far, far bigger problem than filter bubbles or confirmation bias at the moment for the news industry as a business model. thing. You know, and I would say also as a societal problem, because when we don't optimize good journalism well, what happens? People go for the easy stuff. They go for the silly, sensational, clickbait, the free stuff, or just the crap stuff often, because, oh, thank God, here's something that's just totally easy, and even if I don't believe it, you know. And so the opportunity of AI is absolutely to optimize. AI, what it's really good at is if you give it some content, how do you want that, sir? Do you want that in short, or do you want it long? Do you want it on audio? Do you want it as video? Do you want it done in a kind of localized to where you live? Well, AI can do all that. It can be the sort of personalized chatbot that acts almost. So your news organization can be like a personal chatbot, if you like. You know, so that's, I think, certainly the opportunity. And the negative, I'm not so worried about, I'll be honest with you. I'm not quite sure what the negative is. I don't think that us having slightly individualized media portal is necessarily a bad thing. We've spent the last 100 years, if not 200 years, especially in places like Czech Republic, encouraging people through education to self-actualization, individualization, and now we're saying that they've got to have the same common media experience. I'm not so sure.
I would also argue we already don't share the same ground truth and haven't for a long time. I want to start to move to questions, so you can put your questions. I'm going to call on the room in a second. For those of you who are watching online, you can post your questions in Slido. I'll start with the room. Are we? Great, we've got some questions in here already. But let's start with the room. Does anybody in the room have a question? If not, we'll go to the online audience. Oh my goodness. Okay, the first hand I saw back there. Yes, you in there. Yes, you. Yes, with the bangs. Oh.
Sorry, loud enough,
Can you start again? Sorry.
I thought I was loud enough.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking about the AI moderator and how it gets its content. How do you check the content, and what's the audience reaction to the fact that AI is giving you night news?
Okay, so there are two components. One is the AI voice. So it's that there is this voice algorithm that was trained on the living moderator. By the way, we have a very strict contract with the moderator, so it cannot say whatever you want or we want. That's one thing. The other thing that we also, or our editorial team uses AI to choose from news that is produced by our outlets. So for example, Seznam Správy. So it takes news from our media that went through editorial control, and also editors check what the language model and how the language model is actually interpreting the news. So there is still editorial oversight. We haven't outsourced the whole broadcasting to the AI, at least not yet.
Great, thank you. We'll come back to the... Okay.
Very quick anecdote. I was giving a talk at NPR in New York, and we were discussing exactly that. And yours is fail-safe, that's great. And one of the producers on this radio show said to me, I don't mind if we have an AI-generated newscaster, because all that happens at the moment is I write the script, she comes in, reads it out without even rereading it first. So I might as well just have a robot to do it anyway.
Wow, I may have to follow up with you about who that...
It was a joke.
I get it. No, I get it. All right, we'll come to... Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that it's very convincing. We had a conference 2 weeks ago, and we did this trick, or the quiz with the audience, where we played the real moderator and the AI moderator, and most people were confused which one is which. I'm sorry? They couldn't really recognize. Actually, the AI sounded better than the real one.
Did you get a sense, though, of... Sorry. Did you get any sense of, I don't know, any feedback in terms of in principle whether they objected? Because my sense of it is that they probably don't, particularly as long as you're open about it and it's not replacing your real presenters. Do you got any sense of whether they didn't like it?
If the audience didn't like it, well, we are very transparent about that, so they know that the AI voice is broadcasting, and it's only over midnight. So it's I'm not aware of that, but I have to check with my colleagues. The only person complaining or that could be complaining is the moderator, the living one. But she's not.
All right, I'm going to go to one of the online questions, and I'll come back to the room. This is a very good question, which is, I'll read it. How can we responsibly inform about AI in the news media to avoid either catastrophic or overly optimistic narratives? So this is about how do we improve coverage of AI, journalist writing and reporting about AI, to bring that very kind of sense-making that I talked about at the very beginning of this panel. Because when we, I'm just editorializing myself here beyond the question, a lot of that kind of hype comes from news media itself. Tanit.
I think it's a brilliant question because it addresses the fact that we're a party of that whole sort of thing happening. And you should normally actually refrain from reporting about things that touch you directly because you have an inherent bias. So it touches the industry. People may lose their jobs or may have to choose jobs. So it is a real challenge. I really like the question because it is a massive challenge not to fall into the trap of, again, being sort of part of the hype. And so far what I see from a couple of publishers is that they basically have euro signs or dollar signs in their eyes thinking about newsroom efficiency. Because obviously when you had, talking about sort of the publishing industry, when you had print, the newsroom would make up sort of a third maybe of the cost. Now with online newsrooms, suddenly the newsroom makes up 2/3, a half or 2/3 of the cost. So anything that is reducing the cost obviously makes them very enthusiastic. So they might just be limiting the bigger picture to their very specific focus. So bottom line, it comes down to good journalism, like stepping back, seeing the bigger picture, being precise, being transparent, writing that it touches sort of its own interests as well, that you're not an objective, disinterested, neutral party because it's basically your daily job.
I just want to add to this one that it's slightly more complicated than that, because unlike writing about sport, writing about AI is very difficult. Because AI is difficult. AI is not easy to understand, even for scientists, even for technologists. And the way
I'm sure sports reporters would totally disagree, but sorry.
Okay. But anyway, the point is that it's difficult. And I actually think that the society needs to make a pressure on AI technologists and AI scientists to make AI transparent, to really focus on disclosing the state of the art of AI, to talk about the state of the AI in a fair, correct, transparent way, to get monitored, to get audited. Because the worst thing that can happen is that people will stop understanding and the AI industry will stop reporting. And then the gap between understanding, the gap between us understanding what the future is going to be and what is going to be really is going to be massive. And that's precisely the point why I haven't signed the Elon Musk proposal to pause training, because pausing big AI training models, it's a cliche. It wouldn't solve anything. The only thing that would happen would be that AI would went underground. Kind of people would be building AI training models and not talking about, having this undisclosed. And that was going to be widening this understanding gap. And actually, I think that for society, it's extremely important to focus on this gap so that this gap is not growing.
I just wanted to add that we really need to push for transparency also with the whole explainable AI thing. And it's funny and quite ironic that the company OpenAI is no longer disclosing on what kind of data the GPT is trained, which is not very open to me. So we have to be really put them under scrutiny, I guess.
Right. Another question in the room. Okay, you've got just over here, and then.
Do you think AI use should be regulated, or do you think it's even possible to regulate that sort of thing?
We're going to get deep into that in the next panel, but if somebody wants to give an answer to that.
Like real quick, I'm positive AI needs to get regulated. There is no way without AI regulation. Only the AI need to be regulated in a way that we will not regulate ourselves away from innovation. This is the true danger. It needs to be sophisticated to the point so that we can still kind of enjoy and take the benefit of the AI hype while regulating the human AI interactions and the impact on people. And I would say that the most important thing in AI regulation is that countries need to collaborate. There is no way how Europe, UK, US would compete in AI regulation, just wrong. There needs to be partnership and collaboration, because this is the only way how the Western society can enjoy the benefits of growing AI and at the same time do their max to protect users from the negative impacts of AI.
To add to that, yes, of course, there must be a regulation. The question is, which one? It's always easy to say, and I find, especially sort of politicians calling for regulate big tech, and in Europe it's so easy to call for regulate big tech because big tech is sitting in the US, so it's quite popular because across all parties, because you're not harming any industry in Europe, you're just basically finger pointing. And I'm not saying that the finger always goes sort of in the wrong direction, but it's just very simple to say we need regulation, we need regulation. The moment it becomes complicated is when you go deep and say which kind of regulation, because, and to your point, collaboration is absolutely vital. The problem is, as we all know, there are some countries who just don't like collaborating. They have more aggressive stances to others. So they very closely watch already what is happening in Brussels right now. If you see, or Germany. So there is that great, data protection thing in Germany. Don't believe for a second that people or politicians in Russia, in Turkey, in authoritarian states won't use that to say, look what Germany is doing, look what Brussels is doing, look what, Canada is doing to regulate tech. And we're going to do that too, because we're going to follow the European model. Democracies are going to do it. We are a sort of democracy as well, slightly more authoritarian. And it's just that our definition of what is harmful content and what is disinformation is completely different to our definition. Yeah. So we always have to bear in mind, regulators in Europe, across the world, in any democratic system, any sort of rule of law system, need to bear in mind that whatever they do will have effects, not just can have effects, but will have effects on countries which are run authoritarian. Does that mean not regulate? No, it doesn't. But it's just a lot more complex, and I think that second consequence is often overlooked.
Second order effects.
Exactly, yeah.
And I said we're going to talk about that a lot more in the next session, the next panel. Another question from our online audience. How can we teach others about how to spot generative AI and tell the difference between fabricated and human written news? I will add a corollary question to that is there actually an effective tool, never mind whether it's desirable or not or needed, but is there an effective tool to tell the difference between human written and fabricated news?
We kind of mentioned this already, didn't we? We said it was kind of an arms race. And I think, in a sense, we're kind of missing the point. This is your next panel, really. So I won't go into it too much. But I would caution, what do you mean by disinformation, misinformation? The
question wasn't about mis and disinformation. It was about authentic content versus machine-generated
content. All right, even
content.
that. Do you need...
Let's pretend it's both all
Same thing then.
Accurate.
Same thing applies though. What do we mean by generative AI-created content? If I use ChatGPT to do some research and then I write an article, do I have to tell people that that was the case? Now, sometimes it's a bit more obvious. You can say... So I think we worry... I'll be honest, I think we worry too much about it. I think in the short term, it's good to say it, partly as a media literacy thing and a transparency thing, as much for your own staff as your customers, to be conscious of this. But, journalists, in the past, we would use a news agency. I used to work in TV newsroom, and I used to make a package about something that's happening in Czechia, and I'd be stealing in, material probably from your organisation, or from Reuters news agency. We didn't tell people that. They assumed that I'd made it all, kind of thing, So it's the same, again, the copyright on intellectual property. Sometimes I used to go to work and I'd see a great story in a newspaper and I'd say, okay, let's do that story. I didn't even reference the newspaper often. So I think there's a kind of, go back to first principles. What do you do now? What do you think that you expect according to your standards? And what do you think is a necessary level of transparency for your public? I think it's a lot less than we worry about.
Okay, is there a tool? Is there a tool that?
Yeah, loads of tools. Yeah.
Okay, that's effective.
Yeah, there are quite a few tools. There are many startups who are in the space, kind of trying to deliver the service. You can Google them out. But as I said before, none of this is effective against manipulation. If I want to kind of manipulate the system and kind of deliver and kind of show that the system doesn't work properly, I can do this easily, and each of you can do this.
Well, I agree with that. And one of the first questions I got when we introduced the AI detection tool, that if we will make it public sometimes, and we said no. And I share very little information about how it's trained and how it works, exactly because it's an arms race. So the more we tell, the sooner it became obsolete, and then we had to retrain it and do it again. So we will not make it public, so if you wanted to ask that.
Okay, so the question is rejected. Yes, I think you were next, right here in you in the blue or gray shirt.
So I'm really interested in the personalization that's happening on social media with algorithms and AI and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any trends either by demographic or by region of how that's getting skewed, or if it really is just a case by case basis. Does that make sense?
Your question is about AI-driven personalization.
Yeah, so if a big risk is getting biases from a personalized algorithm for political parties, for example, is there a trend by a certain demographic, an age group, a region, or I guess I'm kind of wondering how does that even begin to get created?
I don't have an answer to your question. So my personalization experience is I like raccoons, and I see on TikTok and Instagram that if I look at a raccoon video, I get, 20 million raccoon videos afterwards. So it is quite obvious. I think to start with, the most important thing is that you are aware of it, that everyone is aware that there are data sort of feeding into the algorithm that then shows you the personalized feed. I also think that, and Charlie has touched that at the beginning of the conversation, we tend to think that news are so very important, or sort of political news, so very important for the platforms. They make up, I don't know, if we believe Facebook, 4%. I don't know any numbers on TikTok. They can, of course, that can have massively,
And a lot of that news will be about raccoons.
And will be about raccoons.
It won't be hard political news all the time.
So I think we sometimes overrate that effect, personalization, on sort of propaganda and news. I think that if you look at, Telegram groups, which are a shut case, sort of total black box, apart from the, 40,000 people who are inside, but that's not the personalized thing you were asking about. I think those groups, which are very opaque, can have a higher influence than you basically losing time on your feed because one video after the other tries to keep you within the platform.
It's a very good research question, actually.
Yeah.
Mainly because I don't know the answer. But in other words, the demographics thing. What we've done research on, or people have done research, including my students and people in my unit, they will take a demographic like people aged under 25, and they'll say, how do they enjoy getting their news? And that may include whether they like it being personalized or not. And but I don't think anybody has done a kind of cross demographic, partly because I think it would be, I think I alluded to this earlier, that one of the differentials is that taking a bunch of young people, for example, of a certain age group, they themselves are going to vary so much by education and also their propensity to consume news. And as I mentioned before, one of the things we know is that people who consume the most news are the ones that hate it the most, in the sense that they're more likely to avoid it. And I think there's something around, I don't know, I don't think they're avoiding it because it's over-personalized. I think they're avoiding it because it's not personalized enough. You know, and then there are other forces at work which aren't to do with AI. So, for example, increasingly we have subscription news organizations, and this is anecdotal at the moment, but I often hear people saying they're surprised at their readers, because they're now paying for it or have a membership, they're now saying, I don't want to hear this left-wing stuff or right-wing stuff. So you actually get people saying, make my news more differentiated and distinct. You know, and I suspect that's the truth, because everyone out there, if you ask them, would you like a diverse set of political news sources? Would you like, when I give you your journalism, would you like left-wing journalism and right-wing journalism, national journalism? Yes, I would. I would love all that. Bullshit. They click away on the stuff that they agree with and the stuff that's relevant to them to a great degree. I do, and most people do. And we've done research where we've done that. My favorite bit of research is when, you know, people are asked, my news. You're asked to say, I'm interested in this and this and this. And then you serve them that stuff. And they discovered that they weren't actually consuming it. They was consuming raccoons and football and recipes. So they took the button away where you could choose, because it was not having any impact. And people complained. They said, you've got to give us the button. We have a right to choose. So they put the button back, but they disabled it. and they just ignored what people said and just went by what people did.
Makes them feel better, though.
So people personalize themselves, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you know, just kind of hate this argument of kind of taking people's right to do their control and personalization away and back. You know, I think it should stay with people. But you know, I would agree with you that it's really difficult these days to distinguish right-wing leaning and left-wing journalism. It's very easy to distinguish good quality and low-quality journalism. And unfortunately, the paid subscription is connected with the good quality journalism, and the free stuff is often low quality. And actually, I think that the big problem for society is to be able to deliver a good quality journalism to people who cannot afford it, people who just cannot buy subscription. So how do we serve them with the good quality journalism so that they don't take only the free, easy to digest stuff, which is often manipulative? And I wanted to the demographics. You know, I've got like 3 anecdotal pieces of evidence that are my kids, teenage and early 20s, and they uninstalled TikToks from their phones precisely because it was so personalized that they got scared. Because of that reason, they all 3 of them, all girls, uninstalled TikTok independently.
I don't know that that's actually a trend, but that's very interesting. So Michael, Tanit, Charlie, and Peter, thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation. Thank you to the audience. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in, what, 30 minutes? 30 minutes. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So we only have 2 mics? This one's not working. Okay. Is that one working? Okay, great. All right, thanks everybody. All right, if you can grab a seat, we're going to get started again. Thank you. Now you can, now you all like to, okay. Okay, welcome back to our audience in the room and also to our audience online. We're really delighted that you are sticking with us. We're going to continue the wonderful conversation that we had before, and this time building off of, folks, we're getting started up. Thank you. We're going to build off the great conversation we had in the first panel about just all of the different directions that AI is going on, that's going on at once, and talk with some 3 new great panelists about the regulatory environment and its impact on news media. So representing the entirety of the news media worldwide and all journalists everywhere on this panel is Patrick Bowler. Did I pronounce your name? I'm so sorry. He's the head of innovation and audience engagement at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which I will say on a personal note, I had the absolute honor to go tour this morning, and what an inspiring organization it is, just phenomenal, and a fortress. He leads digital and was previously a staff writer and digital editor at the New York Times, a reporter at the South China Morning Post and elsewhere. Next is Daniel Brown, head of cabinet for values and transparency at the European Commission. He led the team working on the European Democracy Action Plan, and his current portfolio covers the topics of disinformation, human-centric and ethical approaches to AI, as well as economic and monetary affairs. Previously, Daniel served as the first Deputy Minister of Regional Development in charge of EU policy. And finally, Johan Lau, who is a British, well, you're not British, though, you're German. I am German. Yeah, it's okay. I don't know why I was going to say British. Oh, British Academy. Okay, postdoctoral fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. He himself is German. Johan studies the legal, social, and governmental implications of emerging technologies such as AI and big data. His current research projects ask how human oversight over automated decision-making can be improved and implemented effectively. So this is a great flow out of our last panel. Okay, so Daniel, we're going to start with you. I want you to sort of give us the view from Brussels and help the audience make sense of the various the framework for AI, mis and disinformation, online content, what's been agreed, what's already been already live in the wild, and what's coming.
Thank you very much.
And we'll give you 2.5 hours to go. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And by the way, you mentioned that I was, before coming to Brussels, Deputy Minister of Regional Development, and my office was right over there for some time. So it's a double or triple pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, I could save time by saying everything. There's not much to add to the previous panel. But maybe the broader backdrop for what we're doing in the European Commission is that new technologies have reshaped the information environment in many ways. There was no time in history where people had access to so much information from so many sources. And let me maybe say that when the internet, I'll talk about the online space especially. When the internet appeared, it came with the idea of more freedom, more information, more democracy. And one could say that it was hijacked in a way by malicious actors, by reckless actors. I didn't want to say greedy.
And we do see a lot of disinformation, foreign information manipulation, interference, and the negative externalities that were discussed. And the EU made an effort to bring forward a very holistic, I would say, framework for governance of information and democracy in the online space. And that has many pillars. One is privacy, protection of privacy. So this is a done deal if you're asking me to recap what is already done and what is being negotiated. So we have the GDPR. We have a system of protection of users' rights, the Digital Services Act, which came into effect very recently, which, among other things, sets out the principle that what is illegal offline has to be illegal online. We have protection of competition with the Digital Markets Act. We have protection of media freedom, and that is not a done deal yet with the Media Freedom Act. That is a bit of our baby in full negotiation swing at this moment. The last pillar I would mention is the AI Act that was also referred to in the previous panel, which addresses the risks generated by specific uses of AI. So I think the EU offered the world a vision of how to bring the internet back to the original values with which it came. And it has all these pieces. Maybe to tie it to the media more closely. All these risks and their mitigation are important not only for the people but for democracy, because what we see now in the information environment and what was discussed in the previous panel is that it's all very instantaneous. And the democratic process is rather long and sequential, so not built for such kinds of threats. So it's very important that we have these mitigation factors. The problem for media specifically, I think, is that when you have this model matching user-generated content with engagement, it doesn't favor quality information and facts, which is incidentally what journalists are trained to give to people in an attractive way. And this is compounded by decreasing revenues from advertising. This is compounded by also threats to journalists themselves through the use of spyware. So there are many elements that we are addressing, also by the Media Freedom Act, that I will be happy to elaborate on. To conclude, I think the overall approach, when you take all of those pieces together that I enumerated, the aim, in a way, is to promote trustworthy information and to empower those in the information environment that play a role in that, and to reduce the prevalence and the space for the negative externalities, including disinformation. So when you also mentioned that I was in charge of disinformation, I'm happy to elaborate again on the concrete initiatives that we laid out. But I would say that the fight against disinformation and generally the information disorders and supporting media, independent and free media, are two sides of the same coin, and that's the backdrop for everything we did.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. You have a much darker view of the internet and the information ecosystem than our last panelists. But as the great philosopher Taylor Swift once said, two things can be true at the same time. So I have many follow-up questions, but I want to get each of our panelists to get a chance to speak, and then we'll come back to it. So Johan, you study and are sort of an expert on the broader regulatory framework, mostly in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So give us your view of where things are.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think to give some historical background, I think we're seeing now the European Commission trying to learn from the history of the internet and social media, where at the beginning when we first had the social media platforms, we didn't regulate them as much, and then we had a lot of negative outcomes from Cambridge Analytica to some of the campaigns, and I think that the previous panel talked about this. So now we're in a moment where I think the European Commission wanted to be, when it comes to AI, they wanted to be ahead of the game, and this is difficult to do. So the European Commission proposed the AI Act, and the European lawmaking is a bit complicated. There are several institutions which can give their input to the law. So the European Commission publishes their proposal for the AI Act, and then happens what Vivian mentioned, ChatGPT gets released, and suddenly you don't have something particularly on foundational models and generative AI in it. So then, you see, I want to see, maybe you can share later what the mood was in the room when that happened, how you felt about that. So, and it's incredibly complicated to regulate a moving target. I think that's the situation we're in. And what we see now is also trying to solve some of the problems that by having been hands-off on social media for a long time and digital platforms is what you also mentioned, the Digital Services Act, another piece of legislation that the European Commission has recently first proposed and then brought through the legislative process, which is in force now. And now the question is really, we have a lot of law on the page now. The question is, how do we implement it well? So what is going to happen? What is meaningful? What will be effective in court also? And I think someone here in the audience mentioned personalization. It was really, I think it was you, was really interested in it. So to make a complicated story short, the Digital Services Act tries to diffuse some of the risks of large online platforms. So in the future, or maybe now, you can there's what is called a notice and action procedure. So if you see something that is illegal, or if you see something that violates the terms and conditions of the platform you're using, you can actually make a notice to the platform, and they will look at it and maybe take it down. Now, this is connecting to the point of personalization. This really means that you need to do it, because you get content, you see content that I probably won't see because I'm too old, I'm also male, I'm not in the target group. So that means we are dealing with a personalized space where if you have something like that, a notice and action, a notice and takedown mechanism, it really means that all these different pockets in the different target groups really need to act, because I can't do it for you. I won't have the same feed as you. So that, just coming back to your question of personalization, this is why it's really so important. So I think to round it up, we're at a stage now where we have a very active regulator, where a lot of laws are being proposed, and the question is really, how do we implement it well? And that is kind of the big problem, because it requires a lot of collaboration between lawmakers, but also the big platforms who have the resources, have the talent, and have the technology at their hand to really decide whether or not these laws are going to be as effective as we all hope they're going to be.
Okay, wow, I have so many follow-up questions, but I'm going to come to you, Patrick. Now, you are not a regulator, but obviously, whatever regulations come down the pike, whether it's any of the sort of the alphabet soup of acronyms that the EU has put out or others, is going to impact the information ecosystem, which is going to impact your work. So tell us how it affects you and why it matters.
I think, thank you so much for having me, and I just noticed there are a few journalists in this room, so I'm hopeful that after this conversation, there will be a few articles written about regulations, because regulation in this field is so important. Yes, in countries where there is a rule of law, and yes, in relatively free countries, but it is also very, very important in countries where there isn't, where laws and regulations can be abused by governments. You visited our offices in Prague here earlier today. You saw it's a fortress to get in. There was a reason for that, because we operate in 23 countries, and in many of these countries, we are perceived to be the enemy of that government. And there are laws in place that actively lead to the persecution of journalists or people practicing.
And in fact, you have journalists in jail in various countries that you operate in. You're journalists.
That's right.
Or who have been killed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are different aspects to it. There's the aspect of practicing journalism, and there's also the aspect of consuming journalism from a public perspective, from an audience perspective. Both things can be illegal, and the vast abilities now of the abilities of individual governments, of censorship, of silencing voices, of drowning out voices, and of identifying who these people are who are expressing their opinions, or who are listening to people expressing their opinions, are real sources for concern. So there are these concerns, of course, say in China and Russia, but maybe even in some parts of Europe, and maybe even some member states of the European Union. So we should really be asking some very, very tough questions about the regulation that is put in place and how it could possibly, let's hope not, ever be abused by these state actors.
And is that a concern?
Yes. Is that a concern?
Yes.
Okay. So, Daniel, tell us a little bit more about what is happening with the AI Act. So Johan talked about how it was designed prior to the generative AI boom that we've seen in the last year. So what is the state of play, and how are things evolving?
Well, specifically with AI Act, the state of play is that the negotiations are in full swing. One of the hot issues discussed is additional provisions on generative AI, precisely. There is not a common position and a common direction at this point by the European Parliament, which is one co-regulator, and the Council, member states from the other side. So these are difficult. These are difficult topics. There is a lively discussion. It's obvious that there needs to be something factored in the regulation, at least in terms of transparency. But, and that applies not only to the AI Act, but also to the Digital Services Act, these are process-based regulations. So this is not the manner in which some authoritarian countries deal with regulations. We don't look at content, we don't look at actually the technology itself. So the AI Act is constructed based on use cases. So we say when AI is going to be used for a certain risky use, there needs to be, there's a very narrow top of the pyramid of banned uses of AI.
And what would those, can you give us a couple of those examples?
Toys for children prompting self-harm.
That would be a good thing to regulate, yeah.
Live remote biometric recognition, social scoring. So very limited. It's actually these three, if I remember correctly.
What was the third one? I didn't catch it.
Social scoring. Some large countries have a system of grading their citizens, and then this influences their access to services, for example, or entitlement to
countries
to
that
rights.
shall not be named here.
It's China. And the vast majority of the use cases is not risky. So we don't regulate that with the AI Act, and I think that's sometimes misperceived. There's also a lot of activities to promote the use of AI. What we are saying with our strategy is that for the uptake of AI, you also need trust. So if there are uses of AI with high risk, and we define that, that high risk in an annex to the regulation that can be dynamic and dynamically changed. There are some transparency requirements for the provider and the user of the AI, and there are some obligations to ensure quality and robustness for the data and recording, you know, to be able to audit later what happened. So I think it's really common sense. I mean, it's very difficult because it's emerging, evolving. I would just like to dispel the notion that this is a top-down regulation of technology. It's not. And if I may add, because you alluded to the Digital Services Act and to social media specifically, there's no other sector that polices itself. So this was not okay. The time of self-regulation is over, and it's not only the EU that recognizes that. Everybody else is looking at the Digital Services Act, and by the way, at GDPR, many of them are looking at what we did there. And with disinformation, sometimes a lot of things get conflated. I mean, one thing is the disinformation itself and the malicious actors, but another thing is that you have an online environment that incentivizes the negative externalities and makes the manipulation very cheap and easy. So it was very natural and needed to rebalance the responsibilities also for the, I don't like to use big tech, but you know, 15 years ago, they didn't, these platforms didn't have the role that they have now for journalism, but also for people. I mean, the algorithms decide what you see or don't see. They decide what products you get offered or not offered. And the DSA and the whole system around it, because there's also a lot of non-legislative efforts, it doesn't regulate content. It only obliges the platforms to put in place capacities and processes to be able to mitigate the harms that their services pose to people and the society. And I would make an analogy to the banking sector. This is not a new approach, in fact. It's new in the digital field, but if you're a branch of a bank, and every Monday you see the same person bringing you a plastic bag with 10,000 euros in cash, the third time you're going to start noticing that maybe you should, you know, ask, what is this? Maybe report it or do some additional due diligence. I think you're absolutely right that, and I would say that the cornerstones of the legislative framework are there. I think Europe is there, and G7 and the rest of the world are looking at what we did. The challenge is indeed implementation. This is going to be a huge load in terms of also capacities and expertise. But again, when we were constructing the DSA and the AI Act, we ran it, I will be more diplomatic here. We ran it through a test of imagining an EU member state with a government that is not fully complying with democratic principles, let's say it that way. Mm-hmm. So we were very careful.
Some theoretical countries, yes.
We were very careful in running it intellectually through this test, and if you look at the Media Freedom Act, for example, there's a lot of European level backstops in a way that prevent these risks. And my last remark, we can't regulate ourselves out of these problems. So this is not only about regulation. What we did in the last years is also to incentivize cooperation. So we brought together the media sector, the NGOs, the very large online platforms, and the regulators to also go beyond regulation, which set the legal requirements, to what I call put a bit more CSR into the information space.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah. If I can, two thoughts on that. And the first one is about social harm, and the second one is on transparency. And on social harm, that was a reporter in Hong Kong in 2013, 12, when China started issuing regulations, when they start talking about if something goes viral after above a certain threshold and it causes social harm, these are the criminal penalties you'll be forced to. So there is, and that has led to social platforms being built in a certain way that then disincentivize a public debate on critical issues, and has then built into the public debate kind of barriers for society to tackle really difficult issues that might offend part of where you need to have a conversation, where you need to have a public debate. So there is really the plea of the journalists on this panel would be really to think about, like, what does this mean for the future communication architecture on systems in the future? On transparency, we were part of the C2PA initiative that is really about content authenticity, and it was so important for other media organizations in that in that project, where you have some metadata that points to the original content and lets you know if there is any distortions or anything comes from two images, what have you, to get the copyright rate. So this is an image by, say, the New York Times or by Reuters, what have you. And we kept saying at this point, yeah, and that they said transparency is great, but what do you do when someone in Turkmenistan shares an image with you of, say, bodies of people who died from COVID during the pandemic that were just buried somewhere? You have to hide that ultimate source, and so I think there's a discussion to be had about transparency and trustworthiness and hiding, and being able to kind of set some boundaries to that.
Right. You have to protect sources, among other things.
Yeah. I'm going to come to you in a second, Johan. I just want to, Daniel, ask you one quick follow-up. I want to come back to the AI Act, and you said there's some lively debate, I think was the expression you used, between the European Union Parliament and the Council, and what is the crux of, what are the major disagreements that you're working through right now in order to get to some kind of place of agreement?
I have to be a bit cautious because there's a trialogue on Monday that is sensitive. But
Sorry,
one issue.
I'm a recovering journalist, so I have to ask these questions.
Well, I'm recovering, regardless of my job, mentally all the time. But I mean, one issue is clearly the generative AI. I mean, that's more a drafting exercise. I think there's more or less agreement that that something needs to be added to the proposal. I think there are still conflicting views in a way about how large the top category of the pyramid of the regulation should be the banned use cases. So the European Parliament would like to extend the lists, and member states invoke, national security aspects and many other elements that are not fully, I would say, consistent with the approach of the European Parliament. So that's also the role of the Commission to facilitate somehow the compromise. And the last element is probably the way, because we really tried to create a future-proof regulation, which showed its limits with generative AI, admittedly. But again, it's a process-based regulation. It doesn't regulate the technology itself, and it classifies use cases and not the technology. And that set of use cases that is either risk-free or high risk or or banned, it's a technical issue of how this will be dynamically taken care of. So there is still a discussion to be had on how exactly and how often this can be, revised and revisited. But I think, we're getting there, and I'm quite convinced that it's not a matter of months, but rather weeks when we reach
weeks.
conclusion.
Yeah, of course, even use cases are fast changing. I mean, now we're talking about, brain-computer interfaces and other, who knows what else we'll be talking about. Those are also use cases that will need to be addressed.
I mean, the use cases are general enough to cover,
Yeah.
I think, most imaginable.
Johan, I want to talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
You have some responses. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just want to use the freedom as an academic to shed some light on some of the things that are being discussed. So one item which you mentioned is whether or not to ban remote biometric identification. So the idea is that you can use cameras, microphones, and record someone in public, and then in real time determine how likely it is that this person is about maybe to commit a terrorist act. And I know that the French government really likes it, and I know that the European Parliament really doesn't like it. So, and that is kind of the negotiation that is going on, which I can name names here.
You can say it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say it. So I don't have to be diplomatic here. So and I think I want to support again the point that both mentioned, that regulation is not going to solve the problem of disinformation, and that is for a good normative reason, and that is because we do have freedom of speech. So that is so important in a pluralistic society that, I mean, we could imagine a law, as a German, I can imagine a law where before you post anything, you have to print it out, send it to a German regulator who reads it and, fact checks it, and then you get the okay 2 weeks later, and then you can post it on social media, which means social media would be dead if we had this. So if you want pluralism, if you want a variety of opinions in society, you cannot use regulation so stringently that the problem of disinformation will go away. I think the interesting question is, how can we use elements of society better that will make us maybe less dependent on the interests of platforms, which are their businesses, their job is to make money, to sell ads, right? Can we use journalistic institutions or researchers in a better way? And this is something that is already going on. We know that there's self-regulation, so not the hard law, but the soft law, which you may follow, but you don't go to jail if you don't. If you use that, there's collaboration between platforms and journalistic outlets, which are trying to fact check and trying to understand how, for example, misinformation on climate change is being spread on big platforms. What can we do? The big problem that we have on the journalism side, I'm sure, on the research side, is the quality of the information that we get, how much we can learn from the data that is being shared. So, for example, if a platform tells me, well, we've sent out, I don't know, 5 billion ads last year, and yes, they were targeted, and these were the categories we targeted after whatever, gender and income, I can't really do, it's better than nothing, but I won't find those targeting pockets, coming back to personalization here, that are really interesting. I don't know exactly the distribution of ads, whether it's political or commercial. So better data, right? Better access to data for researchers and journalists, and maybe also think about the compensation behind it, because you mentioned it rightly that the funding of news outlets, of critical media, has a problem because the ad revenue now goes to platforms. Well, if they're if they're helping keeping the platforms free from trash, maybe that's also a role for them. I don't know. That's controversial. We need to talk about that.
That's a whole other conference.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But we need to think about also about, and this is kind of the last point I want to make. Since we cannot solve the disinformation problem with regulation, with strict laws that tell you what you can and cannot post, we really need to fight the problem, we need to think about the incentives that people have, which is either financial or political, right? You send out misinformation or disinformation because people click on it and it will give you ad revenue, so you can demonetize them, which is a term that is being discussed a lot among regulators, or you can try to make it harder to reach your political goals, which is, I think I don't see him anymore, but the computer scientist earlier on the stage mentioned trust, and I think eroding trust is often what foreign actors are trying to do with our democratic systems, or even within democracies. Some maybe populist actors. So I think addressing the incentives is probably a promising strategy and something that we have to think about a lot more how to do it.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more on incentives. Just with our newsrooms, I can see a lot of the interactions that we have with the social media platforms. You can see them behave very differently, and if there are ways for journalists to be less exposed to harassment, or to get a bigger audience by being more transparent about the organization they're coming from, what have you, the Journalism Trust Initiative and others, then that is a good thing and can be a force for good in terms of how we are self-regulating as an industry. There is always, though, that threshold of at what time does the incentivizing become the disincentivizing? And one example just from China, for instance, if you are ever going to try to post a New York Times article in Chinese on WeChat, or if you're ever going to try no reach, on the public accounts, you just won't, because the platforms have begun to think about trust and constructiveness and positive news. They have kind of hijacked the words and used them as censorship tools. So we started this news account that we called a certain newspaper. And at some point, the system already knows which organization that is, and would immediately reduce the reach to 0. So the platform would say 0 is the starting point, and then everything else is earned. And so the question is really, at what point do you have the bench, the line?
Yeah, I'm not going to say where the line is. I wanted to react more broadly on the incentives, and we have an initiative that I wanted to mention here that does precisely that. That's the Code of Practice on Disinformation. That's a bit of my personal baby, so I will affectionately talk about that. Which has several domains where the signatories, which are all the platforms except Twitter now who left, but also media organizations, advertising industry, NGOs came together to commit in 6 areas. And the first one is actually demonetization of disinformation. I know that in the Czech Republic this is also quite advanced, and there were some very interesting pilots. Then there's transparency of political advertising, so basically to have clear labeling when it's a political advertising. Then there's the chapter on empowering users, so commitments in the area to make the user more aware of what they're seeing and why. And this includes also the incentivization for the platforms to use Journalism Trust Initiative or to use systems showing trustworthiness of sources, so that it's not the platforms by themselves deciding what's a trustworthy source. So to crowdsource a bit the knowledge, which I think is to the benefit of the platforms as well, who are a part of the game, definitely. And then there are 2 more chapters. One is cooperation with fact-checkers to make sure that the platforms moderate content across all languages, not just English and the big ones, but also Slovak and Czech ahead of the elections also. And the last one is access to data, which leads me to a broader point on transparency. Transparency cannot be the ultimate solution, but I more and more am convinced that transparency is the best antidote, at least the starting antidote for the negative effects of the information disorders. And more concretely, the transparency in 3 layers. One is the transparency vis-à-vis the user. So again, to understand what they see, why they see it, and to be able to customize their information diet. Second, transparency vis-à-vis the regulator, so that the Commission can potentially check systematic failures in due diligence obligations and give fines. And the third one is something that I consider in the long term maybe the most important, and that's transparency for the researchers or access to data. So we can't be in the hands of the platforms to understand the risks. There has to be an opening of this shroud, and to be able, for the researchers, for the journalists, to be able to look at what's really happening on the platforms. What are the engagements? What are the trends? How information travels? And this is a missing bit that we have really put a lot of energy into. There are some very promising projects. It's not easy with the platforms, but there's movement, and I would say that in a matter of months, you will see some extremely interesting numbers. By the way, today at 10:30 a.m., the first full reports, because you mentioned data, and to be able to look into more granular data. So part of the code of practice and overarching obligation of the signatories is to provide every 6 months for the very large platforms a very detailed set of data. It's thousands of data points, and this came out today. So there's a transparency center, there's a web page, and now I expect, people, researchers to comb through the data and see, what's been happening on the platform, how the platform has been moderating the content, was it consistent across languages, etc.
One question there, because and I expect probably a diplomatic answer, but the challenge that we have is the last panel also mentioned Cambridge Analytica perhaps also promised more than they actually were able to deliver. And we're always thinking about algorithmic distribution of content platforms that say Meta, YouTube, TikTok, that suggest content. If we look at Russia right now, Telegram is an extremely important platform where the distribution is not algorithmic. It's really, you're following accounts that you want to follow, and you forward messages that resonate with you. So it goes back to the human actor who decides to forward, to follow accounts. What can be done about messaging? Is that part of your plans, thoughts? And the other question, can I ask questions?
Go ahead.
Journalist.
Yes.
The other question is, what do you do when the platform does not talk to you? Telegram does not talk to us. I don't know if they talk to you.
If I may add, I had a tiny stint as a journalist before I did my PhD, so I cannot resist the urge to also ask you a question that is really tied to this, which is, when it comes to generative AI, recently from the European Commission, there was a public statement saying, well, platforms should work on labeling content, identifying content that has been generated by AI, and then put a label on it. And the tool by which to get the platforms involved was exactly, I think, the code of practice which you mentioned. And as far as I followed the news on this, the big tech's answer was, yeah, we're working on it. What are you going to do? So, I mean, it is a self-regulatory tool, and it is not to say that it's a bad tool. It's just adding to your question, what do you do? And then you have the Twitter case. Twitter pulled out from this code of practice due to maybe some leadership changes in the past. I don't know.
Possibly.
Maybe. And a dislike of regulation. And so, exactly, my question would be, first of all, again, how do you deal with that? How do you check? Well, not necessarily with a particular company.
Sorry, you didn't realize it was three
No,
moderators.
I know, I'm sorry. But
I'm going to change the subject after this. So
sure.
Go ahead.
If I may add, with the labeling, because it has also been asked before in the previous panel, so how far does it actually go? So we label content that has been generated by AI, but what if I take the information as a real person, as a human user, and formulate a post that is drawing on the information, but I completely write it myself. That might also get shared, especially if I'm a famous person. I'm not, but maybe some people in the tech.
So I'll let you address this, and then I have questions back to them. So go ahead.
That's very kind. Yeah, on messaging apps, we did talk to Telegram at one point, but they don't talk to governments in general. And if they fall in the scope of hard regulation, the Digital Services Act, and don't fulfill their obligations, they are liable to up to 6% of their global turnover. So I can answer undiplomatically this way. Yeah? We have WhatsApp in the code of practice. I had many meetings with WhatsApp, and they signed up to certain commitments. But obviously private messaging and encrypted communication is a bit of a headache for this. At the same time, what we're trying to address is really the viral spread. I know there's a thin line, and how Telegram works is a bit of a hybrid thing, but the scope is also of the legislation is intermediaries in terms of distributing content. But on the indicators, this is the holy grail of disinformation research. What impact does disinformation have on real behavior of people? I think that's a research field on its own. But what we do have for the first time from today are so-called structural indicators, where we look at engagement. So the platforms don't only report, we took down 3,000 posts. We don't know out of what, and we don't know if people engaged with it or not. So we'll have this data. So I think we're moving on the labeling. Yeah, this was actually asked by Vice President Jourova, my boss, on the 5th of June in a meeting of the task force of this code of practice. It's not easy, and there are. I mean, we're having exactly the same questions, and we're talking to CEOs of those companies about them. But for me, honestly, that's not a reason not to engage in it. And I think clearly there needs to be a standard by which a machine recognizes content produced by a machine. It's a general statement. The devil is in the details. It may be impossible technologically. There are limitations. I think it is possible, and actually just last week TikTok informed us that they took this on board, and they started some way of labeling such content. Google is on board as well, and we set up within this code of practice community a working group, specific working group on this matter. Google took it very positively and offered to co-chair this working group, and there's some progress. Not all platforms are excited about this, and there will be a big difference between text and audio-visual. One is probably much more difficult because then you inbuild the text into new text. So there will be surely very complex issues to solve, but I think without having some sort of a joint standard for people to be aware, at least, I think that would be a problem. Yeah.
Thank you. So we've been largely, obviously, talking about EU regulation, which of course matters because that regulation covers Europe, and it also covers Europeans traveling, correct me if I'm wrong, anywhere in the world. So that pretty much makes them, in some ways, global standards. That said, well, first of all, did I get that right?
You got that right.
Okay,
the rights travel with the data.
Right to travel with the data. That said, all of these, all of the acts that are already in place and those that are coming need to, in some ways, harmonize with whatever regulation does or doesn't happen in other parts of the world. I know the most about the United States, and I don't know how much you're following all of this, but the kind of meetings that you were talking about where EU government officials are in a room with tech companies to talk about mis and disinformation, right now, that does not and cannot happen in the United States. I'm just going to take a moment just to inform this group. I'm not sure how much you are aware, because a lot of this has been happening in the last year. There have been now a Republican-controlled House of Representatives in the United States. The Judiciary Committee has a subcommittee called the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government. This is the name of the committee. That committee, which is chaired by Representative Jim Jordan, has been issuing letters and subpoenas, by some reporting over 1,000 subpoenas to tech companies, to civil society organizations, to funders, to universities and other academic groups, calling for documents, and it's under the banner of we believe the government is interfering, it is causing, particularly under a, is suppressing speech and suppressing conservative speech. So they are alleging that the tech companies are in a conspiracy with the deep state, as it's called, and other actors to make sure that that to suppress any kind of anything that doesn't comply with the Democratic Party values. First of all, this is nonsense. But what has happened, sorry, this is a lot of background, but I think it's very relevant. As a result of the subpoenas, the legality is virtually, most of this is not legal and would not stand up in court. However, when you go after researchers, individual researchers or universities with subpoenas, that causes millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of legal fees. And as a result, and there have been stories, there was an excellent story in the Washington Post about all of this the other day. As a result, a lot of academic institutions in the United States that were studying mis and disinformation, particularly around elections, have either stopped or they're doing very little. Government officials are uncomfortable or possibly will not be in a room or on a panel with individuals from the platforms. All of it, the chilling effect is profound and incredibly destabilizing and bad for democracy. So I am also not mincing my words here. But I bring all of this background up as a way, first of all, to applaud you for not being that, but also to ask all of you, and I'll ask you, well, I'd love for you to say something too, but Johan, to talk about how do we, in light of so many different approaches, and that's one example, there's also well-known differences in sort of American culture and values and European when it comes to freedom of expression and issues around, human rights. How do we deal with the fact that every nation or region has a different approach, and how is that going to affect the efficacy of anyone's regulation? That was a long wind up to that question, but I felt it was important to give that background. I actually want all of you to address this, but go ahead, Johan.
Okay, well, that's a difficult question. But I mean, first of all, we have to see that the big platforms, which are really important because of their size and their hands on developing also AI technology, they have an interest that the laws around the world or the markets that they're in don't diverge too much, because otherwise it costs them a lot of money. So we also have contacts between American companies and European regulators. There's reporting by Billy Perigo in the Time magazine that showed how much OpenAI was trying to talk to the European Commission. They sent around a white paper on that their foundational model, which is behind ChatGPT, shouldn't be regulated as high risk, which, is something that is, I think, normal. This kind of lobbying is normal in Brussels or elsewhere in Washington as well. This was reported. So there's this mutual, or not mutual, there's this interest by big companies that act globally that the laws are somewhat aligned, or they just comply with the most stringent ones, which is usually then, if it's in the EU, it's the Brussels effect that companies apply the laws of the EU, also in other markets just because it's easier. That said, what is also going on with the AI Act and technology in general is something that is probably too boring to report on for journalists, which is standardization. So technical standards that are developed, ISO standards, or Germany, it's DIN norms, the size of a paper, it's standardized, so you can put it in a printer everywhere. This is happening also with regards to AI, and the AI Act actually gives a mandate out to European standardization organizations, that is very technical committees. But this is important for two reasons. First of all, these standards should also not diverge too much. So there's also international standardization organizations, American standardization organizations. They're all going to talk to each other in terms of not diverging too much. So that's one way of doing it, which is not the very, publicly exciting way. You can't report that well on it. And also, what it is easy to agree on is easier to agree on is technical standards versus normative standards. Normative in the sense of what is fair. So if a future standard is going to say, well, you should have some fairness auditing for your algorithms, for your AI. It's not going to tell you what fairness is, because even within the EU, we're not going to agree on that. But it's going to give you some metrics, some tools, which you may use in order to find out whether your algorithm discriminates against someone, whether your AI is benefiting some group of the population versus another one. Now, this is going to say, normative alignment, we're not going to get. We're not going to globally agree on values, but we might agree on technical standards. And therefore, my last point is those standardization committees, again, very technical, is the tech industry is definitely going to be at the table. But do we have journalistic outlets sitting there as well, defining the standards? Do we have the cultural industry, which are underfunded? Do we have researchers sitting there as well? So who's writing the small print rules of tech regulation right now? You're going to see the same tech companies all over again, because they have the money and they have the expertise to send people there. So that's my first answer.
Thank you. Go ahead, Patrick.
I think just to the point on journalism, I think it's so important that right now the journalists in this room and the journalists in Brussels and in DC really report, stay on top of this. Who is lobbying for what? Who are they talking to? Who is talking to whom? So if you're a journalist here, you want to ask, you really want to ask some tough questions in terms of who wants what in Brussels, who is pushing for what kind of change, because it will have effects. And it will have an effect not only immediately in terms of what these people want to do, like you mentioned, it will also have secondary effects. And I'm going to be diplomatic in not naming the platform. We had lots of problems in Georgia with a certain platform. So we reached out to many times, many emails, and we had a meeting with them, and they were quite surprised that we're active in Georgia. And as we started talking about the elections, and they realized, oh, it's not the state, it's the country. And you then realize that there people who are perhaps thinking about one situation, these things can have enormous effects in another part of the world that they're not even thinking about, especially as they're lobbying for something they want to achieve for their constituents, these lobbyists. That may have effects in other parts of the world. And there is a real question also in terms of EU regulation, other regulation. What kind of effects is it going to have on other countries? If you look at ChatGPT, I just tested this morning, I asked, write an article about Wen Jiabao in Chinese. And it ended up this very full of praise for this great leader who was prime minister and advanced the Chinese economy. And there were some unfounded, unsubstantiated rumors about corruption that could not be proven in Chinese. So what does that mean? So what conversations are we having in DC right now about the regulation of AI, and what effect is that going to have on the text that's going to come out on the other end of the world?
Yeah, it's excellent. And Daniel, I'd love for you to address. By the way, after that, we're going to take, we'll have time for just a few questions, but please get your questions ready. And if I can get the iPad back, that would be great. I don't know what happened to it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just a couple of remarks. First of all, we have a transparency page where you see who's lobbying us. So all the meetings are there. So you will see that tomorrow we're meeting OpenAI Vice President, by the way. No, but to illustrate that we're really looking at this global level very closely. Later this week, we have a call with Secretary Raimondo to discuss the preparation of EU-US cooperation on AI and digital technologies. And Vice President that I work for has just come back from China, where she was discussing, among other things, AI, convergence of AI, knowing that on values there is indeed quite a big distance. So there's, I would say, a special and especially intensive transatlantic cooperation at this point, EU-US. There's a lot of work ongoing at G7 level, so the most advanced like-minded countries, where we are working on basic principles for global governance of AI. And then there's the UN Secretary General initiative for basically doing the same, probably more general, but again, principles how to use AI in the future. And this is why we went to China, and then why we're engaging also with the not so like-minded countries, because it's important to have a global outreach for a global technology. If you look at it, GDPR, the data privacy framework that we have, that is by now a world standard. It's something that from Brazil to India you see more or less copied. If you look at the Digital Services Act, many countries around the world are also looking at it very closely. True that in the US it's probably impossible to pass something like this through the Congress, but we are working very closely. On state level, by the way, there are several states in the US that also go in exactly the same direction: transparency, due diligence. And on AI, there we are going in the direction I mentioned. The aim is to have, at the end of the year, a code of conduct at G7 level. We will be in Japan next week to launch a consultation on bringing about these basic principles. And then you would have a certain set of rules. It may be boring, but it will be I think, normative as well at a higher level, where the developed democratic world converges on what obligations the developers of AI technologies have. So I think on the global level, not an easy topic, but a lot of efforts from our side there as well.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, right here. No, we need it for the online. Yeah.
I know like a lot of conversation has been revolved around like the government's regulation on AI, but is there any way like the governments will be held accountable for using AI for regulation? So in reverse, like, is there any kind of agreement like within the European Union or globally on what extent the government could utilize AI for regulation subjects?
It's a great question.
It's a great question. I can be very short. The AI Act, the legislation that we propose, is actor agnostic. So if a government or anybody else is a user of AI, then the obligations apply. So that's very simple. But maybe that's a good hook for me to mention the Media Freedom Act, where we have safeguards, and basically one of the main reasons for the legislation is to provide, for the first time in European legislation, safeguards against government interferences into editorial policies. So that's not per se AI, but there are elements in legislation that do this. I mean, all the time we're actually talking about balancing of many rights and interests. So this is also a case of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that sometime. Another question. Anybody else in the room? In the back. And then we'll take one online.
I'd like to thank the organizers for a fascinating topic, and certainly both sets of panelists for sharing their ideas with us. You mentioned that AI is a moving target. I would think that judging from what has been achieved in the past couple of years, The next year or two will bring many changes, many uses. A couple of times I heard the word monetize, but there was actually very little talk about money. And since I'm also an investor, I'd like to sort of follow the money. To date, the people who have made most money on AI are the chip makers, and specifically NVIDIA. And I think it's very instructive to note why, because their comparative advantage are essentially graphical processing chips that do not follow the sort of standard serial processing of information, but are massively parallel. And if you've seen perhaps a bad connection
Can you hold your mic a little closer to you?
a bad connection on video, you will see the pixelation that sometimes the image undergoes. And usually the pixelation is in that area of the picture where something is happening. They're incredibly clever in their algorithms in focusing on that area of the picture where something is going on, where the ball is moving or where the face is changing, etc. I just mentioned this because, frankly, I do not know who will end up profiting from AI. And I wonder if you could share with us your insight as to where it will help society at large and perhaps growth and, you know, well-being.
Sorry, your question is how will AI help society at large?
Oh, that's one aspect. I'm giving you a choice to answer whichever. Thank you.
I think we talked quite a bit about that in the last, certainly in the last panel. I don't know if anybody wants to take that one. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll ask for advice if you're an investor. I'm terrible in that. So, but just why is there a hype, and why are we finally experiencing not an AI winter? It's because we have three elements in place simultaneously: data, algorithms, and computing power. So I think you were right in your opening remarks that that's a field that is a winning one. I mean, I would be totally guessing where the biggest benefits of AI can be, but what springs to my mind are a couple of sectors where I see that things can come together. One is health, second is transport, and third is education. That's where I think we will see a lot of changes. We can talk about media, but that's more a transformation exercise for me. But if you talk about broader benefits to society, this is what springs to my mind.
Yeah, just to add to that, it depends on the sector, obviously, what you're going to achieve. When I look at the legal domain, for example, I think right now the selling point is the reduction of cost, right? You get, because law is heavily text-based and reading is linear if a human does it, and it takes a long time and lawyers cost a lot of money. So the more you can automate that, the more arguments you can mine from legal texts with AI, the more money you save. And so productivity gains and cost reduction is there, the selling point, versus in healthcare it's probably really to find new treatments. So I'm not sure that that you'll get better lawyers through AI, but you might get better healthcare through AI. So it depends on what you're doing. And just adding to the point about chip makers and also the computing costs that go into training, for example, the foundational models behind generative AI, that is really something where we also need more transparency. And a colleague of mine in Oxford is just starting a research project trying to track where in the world are those data centers, where's the computing power, where are the chips being made, to make this also a question of political economy. And something that I'm working on is trying to find out where the content moderation that goes into training an AI system, which means the data that an AI is being trained on, needs to be, to some point, curated by humans, and they annotate, for example, images or texts. And that is, to a large degree, outsourced to countries where the pay is lower, right? To Kenya, again, another story in Time Magazine there, but also the Philippines is a place where this happens a lot. So it has this global economy, political economy aspect to it, which is, I think, hugely important and something that we're, I think, only beginning to address because we've been concerned with other things first, including disinformation.
Just one thought on the media world. I think the previous panel talked about like the amazing opportunities in terms of simplifying processes and allowing for new types of reporting that could happen. And I think to that, building on that point, I think anyone who's really interested in democracy has a keen interest in making sure that a place has a very vibrant media ecosystem. And that then makes you wonder, like, how do you make sure that there is not that there is an equitable access to technology, so that if you start a new media startup, that you are not completely technologically, you know, like you're in the Stone Age, whereas AP or The Guardian or whoever is kind of light years ahead and has a structural competitive advantage that you will never be able to beat. So a lot of thinking still has to go in terms of how do we support people who are just starting out so that they can benefit, be able to exist in this new media ecosystem.
Great. Well, we are out of time, and I think the audience and certainly our panelists are now well deserving of a drink. So I just want to thank Johan and Daniel and Patrick so much for your insights, and sorry about the pile on there for a while, but it was very insightful. And a big thank you to the audience in the room and to the audience online. And thank you to our wonderful partners, on behalf of Aspen Digital, to our wonderful partners at Aspen Central Europe. So thanks very much.